did last night, in the victory, and a team that had revenge on their mind. Now, nobody on the Tennessee team would admit this, but it's entirely possible that maybe they underestimated South Carolina the first time around. Maybe they didn't take them as seriously as they should have. I can guarantee you they were locked in 100% last night. And what we saw, taking the South Carolina aspect out of this, if you were just watching this as a neutral observer, just a fan of college basketball, we got treated to a really good game. Two very good teams fighting tooth and nail for 40 minutes. And that's exactly what we got. Now, yes, Tennessee controlled the game and managed the gap for the most part, but South Carolina in those last couple of minutes at least made it interesting. And it kept you there. It was just close enough the entire game where if you're, again, that casual observer, you weren't going to turn the channel because, like, whoa, South Carolina, they're putting something together here. Kept it interesting enough. And that's where you have to give your hats off to this team that, yes, you lost, which, again, at the end of the day sucks. But, man, they didn't quit. They went toe-to-toe with one of the best teams in the country for 40 minutes last night. And, that's the unfortunate thing about sports. One team's got to win, one team's got to lose. And unfortunately for South Carolina, they were on the losing end. But it doesn't derail anything, doesn't, mean the season's a loss or anything like that. It was one game. And would you have loved to have won it? Absolutely. It would have been another huge win to add to the resume, like the win you had on the road in Knoxville earlier this year. But you didn't. It's okay. South Carolina is still perfectly fine. All their goals ahead of them, all that kind of stuff, which, again, at the end of the day is the most important thing. Sometimes you just get beat by a better team. And Tennessee, who is likely going to be a number one seed in the NCAA tournament, came in here and they beat you. And sometimes you just gotta shrug your shoulders. So you're obviously going to look back on last night's game and wonder where things went wrong. And one thing that stuck out to me the most, particularly in the first half of that game, was that South Carolina just could not find any kind of rhythm on offense. Now, we talk about this being a key to the game for every time that South Carolina plays, with slowing things down and creating that grinded out type of rock fight type of game, which Tennessee is perfectly fine with playing. And that's exactly what happened. Even though South Carolina did not lead at all last night, they tied it up a few times. Tennessee still played at a slow pace and offered South Carolina that tooth and nail drag out fight like they love to have. Unfortunately, Tennessee just ended up being the better team when it was all said and done. One thing that Tennessee did really well, particularly in the first half of that game, was clogging up the lane. South Carolina, being the physical team that they are, likes to drive to the basket. They attempted 17 three-pointers in the first half. Only made 4 of them because Tennessee's defense was not giving them the lanes to be able to get in there and make anything happen. Now, it eventually got to the point where South Carolina said, screw it, we need to make something happen. And I give credit to Meechie Johnson for being one of the guys that was really pushing with this. Like, hey, the lanes may be clogged. We're going to drive in there and see what happens. Maybe we'll draw a foul. Didn't always end up working out that way, but, you understand, South Carolina's a good three-point shooting team, not an amazing three-point shooting team, and it was certainly hurting them in the first half with only making 4 of those 17. So needed to change some things up in the second half, and they did. We're a little bit more aggressive when it came to driving to the basket, and again, they were doing enough to keep them to manage the gap and keep it close enough. Where, again, Tennessee never got out to a 16-point lead, or it never looked like, well, game's over. Like, South Carolina was doing enough to make it interesting. The unfortunate part is every time that South Carolina would hit something big, usually Dalton Kennett went down on the other end of the court and hit something big himself. And, I mean, he's legitimately one of the best players in college basketball. He as we talked about the first time these two teams played, you knew he was going to get his. You were just hoping that it was not going to be enough to win the game solely by himself, and hopefully that South Carolina was going to be able to limit the guys around him. And he ended up scoring, once again, 26 points last night. It took him 23 shots, which that to me was the most surprising thing after the game, looking at the stats, because I swear every shot Dalton Knecht took last night went in. So the fact that he missed 14 field goals in that game blows my mind. Now, most of the damage he did was from three. 5-11 from three. A lot of those corner three looks where he just got out in space, and that is, on South Carolina's defense a little bit there by letting him run free. And he was just killing him on that outside. And, again, legitimately one of the best players in all of college basketball. And I had this thought after the game, too. He's only been at Tennessee for this one season, so he's still relatively new to a lot of people in the SEC, having spent his prior years at Northern Colorado. But I thought about this, that if he had spent the past 3 or 4 years at Tennessee playing at this high of a level, it's just ignore, he doesn't decide to go to the NBA for whatever reason to be a one and done. If he plays at Tennessee at that high of a level for multiple years, he becomes probably the most hated player in the SEC. Now, he's not as brash as some of the other guys that, have been hated across college basketball before. Grayson Allen, Christian Laettner, guys like that. But the fact that Knecht's so darn good makes you, respect him but hate him at the same time. And once again, great performance by him last night. One difference from the first game to last night's game, as I mentioned, was not limiting the guys around him as much. Ziegler and Adu combined for a total of 8 points in the first game that these two teams played back in January. Last night they combined for 27. That is a pretty significant difference, pretty significant margin with those two guys that, again, they're the complements to Dalton Knecht on this offense. When Dalton Knecht's not on the court, this Tennessee team is okay. They're good, but they're not great. When Knecht's on the court, they're great. And when these other guys around him are able to get theirs as well, then they're just that much better. And they only scored 66 points. Again, it ended up being that drag out, grinded out, tooth and nail kind of game that South Carolina wanted to see. Unfortunately, Tennessee also very good at playing that type of aggressive, hard-nosed defense. And they got the better South Carolina last night. And, I don't think it's anything to go and, go and hang your head and pout about. Sometimes you just can be by a better team. As I mentioned, this is a Tennessee team that came in last night as a 2 seed in Lenardi's latest bracketology. They're going to be a 1 seed in the tournament. They have the opportunity to go out and beat Kentucky on Saturday. And who knows what they're going to do at the SEC tournament. They may win the whole thing there for all we know. But they're going to be one of the top 4 seeds or one of the top 1 seeds in the NCAA tournament here in a couple weeks. And if Knecht continues to play at this high level, I know I talked about this yesterday with Russell Smith from Fox Sports Knoxville, they may finally make that Final Four run. The thing that's long eluded the Tennessee basketball program, despite all the good teams they've been able to bring in the tournament, this year might finally be the year. And again, for South Carolina to be able to say that they split the series with that team and only lost by 7 points last night in a physical, hard-fought basketball game, again, I'm not looking for silver linings here or moral victories, but that's nothing to be ashamed of. It's a great team. South Carolina is a really good team themselves, and they're just at the beginning of their hopeful rise to being a prominent fixture in the SEC for years and years to come. Tennessee was at this point several years ago where they were trying to break through that ceiling and be respected as one of the best programs in the SEC. South Carolina is, again, they're just at the doorstep right now. And we hope this is the first of many, many years of sustained success. It's impossible to predict that right now, but they're way ahead of schedule. Nobody expected them to be here. We've talked ad nauseum all season long about the projections for the year and Lamont Paris calling out the media members that voted on that and all that kind of stuff, and they've proved them wrong. Regardless of what happens for the rest of this season, they have proved everybody wrong up to this point. And that's not for nothing. And the story of the season is still yet to be written. They can go out there. They can win the SEC tournament next week. They can make a deep run in the NCAA tournament in a couple weeks. Who knows? And I know we're just 12 hours removed from this loss last night, which stings because, again, you saw that, championship hanging in the balance and you're reaching out trying to get it. You just couldn't quite get there. And you watched Tennessee win it themselves. Maybe that's the motivating factor. Maybe that's what the chip on the shoulder of this team is going to be in the offseason to try and get a little bit better and win it next year in the SEC regular season. But again, a lot more basketball to be played, tournament play coming up, plenty of things to be excited about with this team. We'll hear from Lamont Paris coming up, get some of his thoughts after last night's game. Also coming up at 9:30, a guy Elijah Campbell, who is live out at the SEC Women's Tournament, is going to be checking in a couple times throughout the day. He'll be joining us at 9:30. That is all sponsored by Cool Care Heating and Air. Continue our conversation about what happened last night between the Gamecocks and the Volunteers. Let me know your thoughts. Firehouse Subs text line 803-404-6100 as well as the Extra Point rolls along on your Thursday morning here on The Game. Once again, want to remind you about keeping an eye on your home's foundation, something that you probably don't think about a whole lot. But if you notice some weird things happening around your home, you could have some serious foundation issues going on. Things like cracks in your exterior brick, cracks in walls or above windows and door frames, doors and windows that might be a little bit sticky, uneven or bouncy floors, and cracks over your garage door as well. If you notice any of these problems, any of them at all, you could have serious foundation issues with your home. If so, you need to check out our friends at Canty Foundation Specialists. Go online to cantycanfixit.com, and they will send out a certified professional to come and evaluate your home's foundation so they can get you fixed up so you and your family can live comfortably going forward. Again, Canty Foundation Specialists, go online to cantycanfixit.com to schedule an appointment. Welcome back in. Extra Points out ahead along with you on this Thursday morning. Recapping everything that happened last night between South Carolina and Tennessee. Tennessee walking away with the 66-59 victory over the Gamecocks, locking up the SEC regular season crown for themselves. And South Carolina gets set to take on Mississippi State this upcoming weekend to wrap up the regular season on the road with a chance to still be one of the top 4 seeds in the SEC tournament coming up and getting that double bye, which is still very, very big and very, very important. And on that note, Coach Paris last night, talking after the game, this will be cut number 26 here, Dave, about keeping perspective on everything after this loss. Here's what he had to say.
An evaluation from further away from it, from a mile away, and but these guys want to win. They care a lot. They care a lot about each other. They wanted to play really well for the seniors. Also, the building is exactly what's happening here. That was my mission when I came here, was to build, and not to sprinkle some sort of magic fairy dust over the top of this whole thing and make it instantly good. And then who knows what next year will look like. And it was to build. And I don't know if anyone talked about a lot of the analogies that I made last year had to do with building a house. And that when you're building a house and you're building the house to live in that house and you want it to be a really solid house, your foundation is up to code. Your insulation is the thickness that it's supposed to be. That's when you're building it to live in it. When you're building it to sell it, all it's got to do is look good, and no one cares if it's warm in there in the wintertime or not. You've sold it already. And so building has been my whole part of my process since I've been here, and we're still building. But it's nice to see that at some point when you look at the thing and the drywall's hung, and you can say, oh, that looks like a bedroom. I see where that's going. And then one day there's paint on the walls and it's still not all the way there, but it looks like a house. And you already know that behind the drywall is the proper amount of insulation. You already know that under the floor is the exact type of foundation that you want to have. You already know all that stuff, even though at this point you can't even see that. So we're building. We will continue to build, but I like where we're at. It's solidly built. What we have right now, it's solidly built. And that's a humongous success, especially in 2024, where we're trying to microwave everything that we can microwave. And so I take a lot of pride in the fact that we have selected the right people as those foundational pieces, and that it's coming to fruition.
And I think it's important to keep that perspective on all things with this team. And if you go back to early November, before the season starts, and you tell any Gamecock fan, hey, in the last week of the regular season, you're going to be playing Tennessee for the right to win the SEC regular season crown, everybody would have been ecstatic about that because nobody would have seen it coming. Now, yes, living in the moment right now, again, roughly 12 hours removed from this game ending, it sucks. And you're going to, it's easy to comb through and say, well, if this went differently, if that went different, if we got some calls, going our way as opposed to maybe some that went Tennessee's way, and I'll get to some of that in a moment, then, we're talking about South Carolina winning an SEC regular season crown, or at least a share of it. It's something to build off of. And again, as Coach Paris mentioned there, this is building the foundation, which got built a lot more quickly than a lot of people thought it was going to. And you hope that going forward that you are talking about that overall great house that he built with his little analogy there, being sturdy and standing tall for a very, very long time. Because let's be honest, nobody expected, not even most people in the South Carolina fan base, expected that house to be built this quickly. And it's not a finished product by any means, but it's got a lot of the structure to it already. Maybe we haven't painted all the walls or put the furniture in there yet, but the house itself looks pretty darn good from this standpoint. And hopefully it continues to be that way. And there's plenty of goals left for this team. As I mentioned, you're going to be in the NCAA tournament. That is a statement of fact. You're not going into the SEC tournament saying, okay, well, we got to win 2 games and we got to do this, we got to do that to have a shot at being in the field of 6-4. No, you're in. Now you have the opportunity to hold on or potentially improve your seeding next weekend, but that's really it. That is the only thing that's on the line for South Carolina next weekend is the opportunity to climb up in the seeding. And, of course, potentially win the SEC tournament, which would be great in its own right and could certainly happen. You could play Tennessee in a neutral site for a 3rd time, and maybe you win that game. And maybe you beat Auburn at a neutral site when you're not having to go to the Plains and play them. Who knows what happens next weekend? We're getting too far ahead of ourselves, but still plenty of things left to accomplish for this team. And this loss, it's going to sting because you're so close, and you could see the light at the end of the tunnel of where you needed to get. You just couldn't quite get over that hump last night. But this team's going to be fine. And this team's hopefully going to be winning a lot more basketball games in the month of March to cap off what's been a very, very special season. And now you shift gears. You move on to Mississippi State coming up on Saturday to wrap up the regular season. Cut number 22 here, Dave. This is Lamont Paris talking about moving on to the next one.
I mean, we just got to play. We got to just go to the next thing and play. You know, we're still playing for. If we win, I think we guarantee ourselves a double bye. I don't know how many times that's happened. You know, I told these guys there's still significant milestones out there, and that's only superseded by all the milestones that we've already achieved with this particular group. But it's nice that you still have some out there. I told them that maybe the SEC wasn't ready for us to be the regular season champs yet, so we'll have to put that on hold and you know, hope to get it back together and go to Nashville and play well and you know, maybe we'll end up being the SEC conference tournament champs. So, but yeah, you just got to go to the next thing. You got to just get to the next thing and get ready to play again when you know you're still playing for plenty.
Looking ahead to Saturday, finish on a high note. This is a Mississippi State team that you beat earlier on in the season. Going into their house is going to be a little bit tougher, and they are a aggressive physical team themselves. So, again, it's not going to be a light work by any means, but South Carolina has shown you that they can beat this kind of team, and hopefully you bookend your season with a win against the Bulldogs, much like you started your regular season, at least, against them back in January. And I will continue to say this. I'll continue to beat this drum when we're talking about this team. Appreciate what you're seeing. Appreciate what the season is. And again, there's no problem with, you know, being sad or upset with last night's loss. That's part of sports. But really appreciate every game that you're about to see over the course of the next month, hopefully. Saturday to wrap up the regular season. However many games they play in the SEC tournament, however many games they play in the NCAA tournament. Because as you've seen, like the Final Four run back in 2017, that doesn't mean you're going to be able to come back the next season and replicate success. That doesn't mean that you're going to be a consistent tournament team for years to come. We hope so. And I think most of us believe that Lamont Paris is a very good coach and is going to do what he says he's going to do with creating a program that's going to be a perennial contender in the SEC, but we don't know that for sure. Heck, a school could come in and poach Lamont Paris this offseason if he doesn't get paid. So there's a lot of what ifs and a lot of variables outside of this season that could change things. And we could be back to talking about South Carolina being at the bottom of the SEC next year if they don't get, you know, a good recruiting portal class or something like that. If some of the freshmen don't end up panning out, whatever it may be. So I implore you all to appreciate what you're seeing now. Live in the moment of every single one of these games and hope, obviously, that it's the beginning of something great. But if it's not, at least be able to look back on it years from now and say, man, I really appreciated and I really savored every single moment of that season because it was truly something special, because you just don't know. And especially with the amount of turnover and change and roster shifts that you have in college basketball, as we've seen in the positive for South Carolina this season, you can go from being a bottom of the barrel to being at the top of the SEC as quick as bringing in a couple transfers. Same way, you can go from being at the top to being back down at the bottom if things don't work out in your favor the next offseason. If you have a couple of key players that leave or whatever it may be, a lot of things can happen. But again, I implore everyone just to appreciate it for what it is and try and savor every moment for however much basketball this team gets to play in the month of March, which hopefully is a lot. We'll certainly see. Reminder, as always, you can watch us on the Game TV, sponsored by our friends over at Shepherd's Glass. And as always, listen to us on the 107.5 Game app. Just download it at your app store and take us with you wherever you go. Coming up next, Elijah Campbell live out at the SEC Women's Tournament, getting set for day 2 of action up there at Bon Scores Wellness Arena in Greenville. He'll be checking in, sponsored by our friends at Cool Care Heating and Air, coming up next right here on The Game.
think the one thing that we can assure ourselves of is defending. And offensive stuff may be up and down and all over the place, but we'll defend. We'll defend. We'll make it hard for somebody to get flow into their offenses, and some people may be able to disrupt our flow offensively. So, I mean, I like the team that we're bringing to the tournament.
Welcome back in. It is the Extra Points Hour. Head along with you on this Thursday morning. That was Dawn Staley yesterday talking to the media as her team gets set to head up to Greenville and the Bon Scores Wellness Arena for their start of the SEC tournament, women's tournament coming up tomorrow. But it is day 2 of the tournament, and our guy Elijah Campbell's been on the scene since yesterday, here to give us his update. But first, his proper introduction.
Following the #1 ranked Gamecocks through the SEC Women's Tournament.
Live from Greenville.
Unbreakable, unstoppable, undefeated South Carolina.
Sponsored by Cool Care Heating and Air. Don't miss your bank shot with your HVAC or plumbing. Check them out at coolcarehvac.com.
Here's Elijah Campbell on the Game Network.
So as we begin this conversation, I want people to understand the day that Elijah Campbell, really the past 24 hours that he's had, because first of all, he was up there to witness the first game between Georgia and Kentucky, drove back here to do the post-game show from 3 until 6, was at Colonial Life Arena last night to see South Carolina and Tennessee, and is now back up there this morning for day number 2 of the SEC Women's Tournament. Elijah, I guess the best question is, have you gotten any sleep?
Little, but I would equate to a quick cat nap at the house. Got up, and I am here in Greenville this morning in a very empty concourse, getting ready for today's action. But they somehow let me back in again for the second straight day, but I'm glad to be here, and I might be able to squeeze in a nap between the first 2 games. We'll see.
There you go. We heard from Dawn Staley there coming off the bumper, and this is a team that's getting set to, if they're not already en route, should be getting en route shortly. They were at last night's game between South Carolina and Tennessee, but they had the double bye, so they don't have to worry about going up there till a little bit later. It's a short hour-and-a-half drive up the road. What, in your opinion, is the benefit of not only playing this tournament in your backyard, but also having the extra rest? This is a team that's been grinding through the regular season, particularly when you even look at, throwing UConn in the middle of an already tough SEC slate. This team's been going hard for the past couple months. Finally have a couple of extra days to rest can only be beneficial, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, basically, from starting your SEC tournament on Friday means you've almost had a week since your last game. It feels like a perfect window because it's not too much time to where you feel like your team's going to be rusty in game situations, but it's not a short enough turnaround like from a Sunday to, like, say what Kentucky and Georgia had to do yesterday to a Wednesday, or what teams like Mississippi State and Texas A&M have to endure going from Sunday to a Thursday, while they also have to have travel-specific days, too. Like, think about Texas A&M having to come from College Station all the way to Greenville, South Carolina. There's an element of having to prepare for this game, have a practice, recover from a game, and have to travel, multiple states by plane to be able to get here, maybe rest for a day or so before getting onto the court and having to play for your life, because they are squarely on the bubble right now. So if you look at what other teams have to do in terms of travel and the shorter turnaround, it is incredibly beneficial for a South Carolina team, which, like you said, has had a gauntlet of a schedule in the non-con and a pretty tough SEC slate as well.
So things get tipped off this afternoon with Texas A&M and Mississippi State, the 9 and 8 seeds respectively. That game at 12 o'clock on the SEC Network, and that game obviously very important to South Carolina fans because the winner of that will take on South Carolina tomorrow at noon in their first game of the SEC Women's Tournament. And when you look at these two teams, they couldn't be really more different. You have a high-scoring offense in Mississippi State versus a very stingy defense in Texas A&M. Mississippi State did get the victory when they played earlier this year, 74-63. How do you see this rematch between these two teams playing out today?
I foresee it being a little similar. I mean, I love what Brandon Purcell has done for this Mississippi State program. He's a really solid young coach, very well respected in coaching circles. I know last year probably didn't go as he expected, but they've had some building blocks for a really good program. And Texas A&M has a really solid defense. You mentioned it in terms of raw defensive rating. They have one of the better ones in the country, but I think they often have struggled too frequently to be able to just generate enough points in a situation like this where, You have a Mississippi State team that likes to play up and down the floor. If Mississippi State's able to get out in transition and be able to limit the amount of times A&M can adequately set up in the half court, they're going to have a little bit of trouble. And I think, it's not quite like as effective as South Carolina's transition offense is, because whose is in the sport. But you saw when South Carolina went to Texas A&M, the type of trouble that they gave the Aggies in terms of transitioning from defense to offense and not allowing A&M's defense, which is their strength, to be able to set up. I think we're going to see something like that today. I expect Mississippi State to win, and I think personally for South Carolina, that would be the tougher matchup is to play Mississippi State as opposed to A&M.
Again, talking to our guy Elijah Campbell out at the SEC Women's Tournament up the road in Greenville. Following that first game, you have Tennessee taking on Kentucky, who defeated Georgia in the opening round yesterday. And this is a Tennessee team that, again, we just saw a couple days ago here in Colonial Life Arena for the second time in just a couple weeks, gave South Carolina all they could handle in that game the other day. And as I mentioned yesterday when we had this conversation, that's one of those teams that South Carolina could potentially match up with in the semifinals if both teams end up winning their respective games up to that point. And it's one of the ones that you do have to be a little bit worried about if South Carolina sees them again.
Yeah, that's the thing about Tennessee. I mean, you look at the record and you're not overly impressed, and you look and see that Tennessee is on the bubble, and you have a moment of scratching your head and being confused because the Tennessee Lady Vols are never on the bubble. They've never missed an NCAA tournament ever in the history of the program since they've been playing in the NCAA tournament. But this team also has, Rickea Jackson, who's going to be a top 5 pick in the WNBA draft. She's otherworldly talented. We saw that at CLA on Sunday when she dropped almost 30 points in that game. They have a lot of size with Tamara Key. They've got Jewel Spear, who I think is a really talented guard. They have a really good roster, and they have way too many losses for a team that is that talented. And they're serial underachievers. But if you look in, the history of March, sometimes the teams that are the ones you don't want to face are the ones that are basically underseeded if you look at the talent, but they're correctly seeded based on the resume. And if Tennessee's starting to get it together a little bit, which we saw a glimpse of that on Sunday at CLA when they became the first team this year to have the final buzzer sound and they'd be within single digits of the Gamecocks in that building, that's a team that I wouldn't be thrilled facing in the semifinal. Obviously still like the Gamecocks in that matchup, theoretically, if they were to play again. But this is a team that, with as much talent as they are, as they have, it's hard to imagine that they are a 5 seed in this tournament, but I could totally see them playing in the semifinals.
We'll obviously have plenty more updates from you over the next couple of days over what's happening up there in Greenville, but I do have to ask before we let you go, you were in Colonial Life Arena last night, a tooth-and-nail, hard-fought game for all 40 minutes. Unfortunately, South Carolina comes up a little bit short of their pursuit of the SEC regular season title, with Tennessee picking up the win. What's your perspective on what you saw last night?
I saw two of the best defensive teams in the SEC absolutely fight and claw their way to getting it in contention at the end. And ultimately, the big difference is just Tennessee made more tougher shots throughout the game. I have no problem with the shot quality that South Carolina had, especially in the second half. Rick Barnes, I thought, had a really good game plan in that game to kind of keep the Gamecocks out of the paint and force not just three-pointers, but tough-look three-pointers. And it's sometimes, Lamont said it last night, sometimes it's a make or miss league. And for South Carolina last night, you had too many misses. And for Tennessee, a guy like Dalton Knecht, who didn't shoot efficiently, but made enough tough shots in that game to create a cushion that they were able to ride for the rest of the game. And I think ultimately that was the difference. Nothing to really be disappointed about. It sucks to not be able to win the SEC when it was that close. But when you watch the game, you realize how slow the tempo was, what type of basketball game it was. It was very similar to what you had in Knoxville, but you look at it as a basketball fan and say, look, these are the two best defensive teams in the entire SEC. These are two of the more reliable defenses in the country. Tennessee has the top 5 defense in the country. It showed last night. It's a tough one to lose, but really the big difference was Tennessee just made tougher shots down the stretch in that game and throughout the entirety of it as well.
Absolutely. We'll have fun up there. We'll hear from you more again over the next couple of days, and hopefully we're talking come Monday morning about another SEC tournament championship for this women's team.
I think we will. If we're in the prediction business, I have a good feeling we will, but LSU and Tennessee and Alabama are going to be some pretty tough hurdles from now until then.
Absolutely. That's Elijah Campbell up there at the SEC Women's Tournament in Greenville, and again, sponsored by our friends over at Cool Care Heating and Air. Elijah, we'll talk to you a little bit later on.
Sounds Thanks for playing. See you guys.
All right, we'll come back and wrap up today's edition of the Extra Point. Get some of your thoughts on the Firehouse Subs text line, 803-404-6100 here on The Game. Welcome back in. It's the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you. Captain Dave producing on the other side of the glass. Again, thanks to Elijah Campbell for the update up there in Greenville at the SEC Women's Tournament. South Carolina gets rolling tomorrow afternoon as they take on the winner of either A&M or Mississippi State, which, again, that game tips off today at noon for South Carolina. And then pregame coverage tomorrow morning, going to start right here on the game at 11:30 in the morning. We'll lead you right up until coverage of South Carolina and either the Aggies or the Bulldogs of Mississippi State. And again, hopefully en route to yet another SEC tournament championship for the women. A lot of you weighing in. Firehouse Subs text line 803-404-6100 on your thoughts coming away from last night's game. Nameless texter here weighs in, actually has a lot. Steve weighs in. Steven Chapin weighs in with a lot of thoughts here. Game was winnable. Refs did not have a good game. One-sided towards the Vols. Team shooting 50% from the free throw line and Michi going over 7 from 3. Not a recipe for success. Kennett just hit another 3. Inbounds dunk was embarrassing. Wondering where the defense was at. A lot of thoughts here, and I understand. I'll say this. And I know a lot of people were talking about this coming away from the game with the officiating, which, hey, it wasn't perfect. And I will reestablish my point that I've said many, many times, and it still holds true that I don't believe that refereeing crews or officiating crews have a vendetta against certain teams or that they're paid off by the league office to make sure team X wins and team Y loses or anything like that. I do think that referees, when you are putting it in their hands and there's the human element of error, that it's not going to be perfect. And yes, there were certain calls that probably could have gone South Carolina's way that didn't last night, but there are things that probably could have gotten called on Tennessee too that, or could have gone in Tennessee's favor that didn't get called too. Very physical game. And they let them play, particularly in the first half, quite a bit. Things got a little more chippy down the stretch in the second half, and you saw more fouls in accordance with that. But I don't hold the belief that the officiating crew, was making sure that South Carolina did not win that game last night. And again, you can point back and look and say, okay, well, if this call goes this way or this call goes that way, then we're talking about a different game. And, that's one of those things that, unfortunately, you just have to kind of live with coming away from these games because you do have the human element of error when it comes to officiating crews. Now, there were some obvious things like when Talon Cooper, went up to attempt the 3 and completely leaned into the Tennessee defender, that wasn't going to get called. Now, Lamont Paris, rightfully so, was pleading his case, which is what I would expect a coach to do because you're going to do everything you can to try and get a foul, whether it's justified or not. But to the neutral observer of that, you're like, yeah, I can see why that was not, called a foul at the end of the game. So it's frustrating, especially when you see some things that don't go your way. But again, I'm not going to sit here and say that I think that they were actively trying to prevent South Carolina from winning that game. You do bring up a good point about Michi Johnson. When you go 0 of 7 from 3, he still scored 18 points, which is impressive at the end of the day. But man, 0 of 7 from 3, if he hits 2 of those, then we're talking about a much, much different ball game. And that was, again, kind of going back to the first half of that game where South Carolina was hesitant to try and drive the lane because of Tennessee clogging things up there. They just started chucking up threes, which, again, is not their brand of basketball. It's mixed in. They mix in the three-pointer, but it's not their main MO when it comes to offense, and was very uncharacteristic first half for them. They got a little bit more confident in the second half, trying to drive in the lane, and they actually outscored Tennessee in the second half, 35 to 31, but just not quite enough, and came up short of the Vols there. Which again, that is legitimately one of the best 4 teams in the country. Their rankings not just smoke and mirrors. They are legitimately one of the best 4 teams in the country, and they are going to be ranked as, seeded as one of the top seeds when the NCAA tournament does end up rolling around. One more here from our friend Casey and Gilbert. Says, sometimes I wish that our players realize that because of our style of play, when they do make mistakes, it's much more noticeable. Bad shot selection is one of my biggest issues with the game, but it's a good fight between 2 good teams. And that is something when you play a slow pace type of offense that South Carolina does. When you aren't making shots, when you aren't in a rhythm, it's more noticeable because you have fewer possessions overall. And again, Tennessee also kind of slowed the game down because they like to play at a slower pace too. So yeah, when the mistakes happened last night, it was a lot more noticeable because you weren't getting, that extra 8 to 10 possessions that you would be if you were playing at a faster pace like some of these other offenses around the country. So yeah, it's an easy game to pick apart. And again, it's one that we'll debate for a while, but at the end of the day, you still have all your goals ahead of you. Go to Mississippi State on Saturday, win that game, get one of those coveted top 4 spots in the SEC tournament, get a double bye, win a game or two there, put yourself in a good position going in the NCAA tournament, and who knows what can happen as the month of March rolls on. But regardless, it's been a fun season, and hopefully just the beginning of what is a very long string of success for Lamont Paris and this South Carolina men's basketball team. That'll do it for today's edition of the Extra Point. Coming up next, it is the Garnet Trust Hour. Mark and Jeremy from the Garnet Trust going to jump back in with us as a lot has changed in the world of NIL since the last time that we talked to them. That's all coming up right here on The Game. All this talk about tournaments means it is almost time to fill out some brackets, and no better place to be associated with filling out brackets than our friends over at Twin Peaks. With the conference championships right around the corner, it's now time to register for the Dose $1 Million Bracket Challenge. Sign up at TwinPeaksBracketChallenge.com. Again, that's TwinPeaksBracketChallenge.com. Then fill out your bracket before the tournament tips off on March the 21st. You can enter for your chance to win $2 million and many more epic prizes as well, including a $50 gift card that will be given out to the top bracket at each and every Twin Peaks Lodge around the country. So again, head online to TwinPeaksBracketChallenge.com. And as always, head down to our friends at Twin Peaks in the Vista. Enjoy food, enjoy amazing beer and other beverages, and take in all the basketball that you can in the month of March with our friends over at Twin Peaks.